Hello and welcome to the 8th War Films podcast, where we're looking at 10 war films. And this time we're looking at Downfall from 2004. My name's Garen Ewing. I'm a illustrator and comic strip author, and I'm doing this with my brother Murray.
Hello, I'm Murray. I have a blog called Musings.
And yes, we've been looking at these 10 films. As I said, this is number 8, so we're almost there. We've had a bit of a gap. Actually, quite a massive gap. The last one we did actually almost 2 years ago, but it didn't appear on our blog till just over a year ago. So it's been quite a large gap in both those ways. And
we could almost have had a war in the meantime.
Yes. And part of the reason is, well, from my point of view, I've been quite busy with work, which has been good. But also, I've been busy before, and I think part of it has been the subject matter. Perhaps because this is a lot... Suddenly, it's getting a lot more serious with Downfall, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a contrast to some of the other... I mean, all of these are war films. They all deal with quite dark things. Some of them are more lighter than others. I mean, the last one we did, The Eagle Has Landed, was pretty much an adventure.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people died in it, but something about it is more... You know, it's soldiers... Well, actually, I don't think there's any excuse for it.
Well, no, but there is a fantasy element to some of these, like the first one, The Guns of Navarone.
Yeah.
Although a lot of these war films have some basis in truth or are based on a real incident, perhaps, they might take that real incident and then fictionalise it quite massively.
Yeah.
And then there's others that are closer to the truth, and Downfall is very close to the truth. It portrays the events in Hitler's bunker at the very end of World War II in Berlin in as documentary a style as possible, I think.
I mean, none of the films we've had so far have dealt with... Actually, they have. You know, like the worst thing about World War II, if you can rank it, obviously, you know, like there's the concentration camps and the mass genocide.
Yes.
That doesn't feature in this. I don't even know if it's mentioned. But all the way through this film, that's in the back of my mind.
Yes.
Because obviously you're seeing Hitler and the other people at the top, and you know that these are the people who made those decisions and put that into practice.
Yeah, the only other film we looked at that has touched on this was It Happened Here.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Which is a fantasy in that it's about the Germans have invaded the UK, or England anyway, and are pretty much enacting a similar kind of set of events.
So a Nazi mentality takes over politically.
Yeah, and it's actually got real fascists in as members of the cast expounding their views. So I mean, I found that fascinating, perhaps one of the most interesting podcasts we've done. I really enjoyed that. But that was basically a fantasy, even though it had these minority views. And I don't know, a lot's happened in the last 2 years as well politically that makes you think about some of these things again, that how these things can start to happen. I mean, I don't think we're anywhere near the reality of a Nazi Germany, but certainly there's little risings here and there in the real world that make you think about these things and how they can get started. And here we are in very close proximity, as you say, to the architects of this terrible political ideology. So that was part of the reason I think we couldn't just, like with the adventure films podcast we did, Time Bandits and The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, you can just sit down one afternoon, really enjoy it and take a few notes. Yeah. Downfall wasn't a film I felt, I'll just pop this in and casually watch it because it's heavy. But I did enjoy watching it again. I just watched it last night, and I think you remember the bits you remember, so I saw it quite a long time ago. And it did have a big impact on me, which is why it's in this list. But the main thing I remember is just kind of this cramped bunker, all the scenes from that. And I forgot there was a lot outside of it as well, which is, I was going to say, provides some relief from the claustrophobic atmosphere of the rest of the film. But it, of course, is not really relief because it's all awful.
Yeah, yes.
But it is an incredibly good film and deserves its place on this list. And I think it was right to put it in for the reasons that it's good, and also the reason that it provides a balance to something like The Guns of Navarone, which is your typical Alistair MacLean hero fest with Nazis dying, like in a computer game. So, Downfall 2004?
Yeah.
Now 14 years ago.
Yeah. Still feels recent.
Someone born when Downfall was made would now be 14. That's how I always think of it. How old would a person be? And that is kind of scary. And it's a German film, which I think is incredibly important. If an American or British or some other country had made this film, it would have a very different feel, would be viewed by people in a very different way.
Also, I seem to remember, now I wish I'd verified this, but at the time, was it one of the first representations of Hitler in a film made by Germans? I do remember there was a lot of controversy around the time because they weren't just representing Hitler as a monster, but they were showing him as a human being. Yeah. Not meaning someone you can sympathise with, but as someone with flaws and also someone who wasn't insane.
No, and even showed kindness to his immediate circle in some ways.
So it was a more complex picture of Hitler rather than...
Yeah, and undoubtedly more true.
Yeah,
because,
which I think is important.
I think someone said in an interview about this that it was important to show him as a human being, as all of these people as human beings, because that's what we need to remember.
Yes,
if you think, this is something else, someone other, I think as they described, they're not demons from hell with claws and teeth.
Yeah.
They're real people, they're us, and it can happen.
And you can meet one and you can think, that was a nice bloke.
Yeah.
And you go away and years later find that he was, doing something really horrible.
Which is a main point of this film, because one of the main characters is Traudl
Junge,
his secretary, or one of his secretaries, and she wrote a book called Until the Final Hour with Melissa Müller, which this film is based on two books, Inside Hitler's Bunker by Joachim Fest and Until the Final Hour by Traudl Junge and Melissa Müller. And she claims, and I think it's probably true, she was fairly innocent politically, fairly naive politically, wasn't aware, and changed her views on Hitler after the war quite considerably and felt quite a bit of shame about them. Whereas some of the other secretaries would get together after the war in a kind of reunions. I think she maybe went to one or two and then shunned them because she felt uncomfortable about it. But she, immediately after the Second World War, she made a lot of notes about her time as Hitler's secretary, and these were obviously very useful for, they were again in her naive stage, so she wasn't critical of Hitler.
She said she recorded a lot of things like what he was eating, and little things that he did, which afterwards she felt, after she'd written this sometime later, looking back on it, she thought that maybe that trivialises it. And so the only way she agreed to publish this memoir was with the historian Melissa Müller, who provided a lot of context and an introduction, and also afterwards, just to explain why this thing had been written. And to point out that Traudl Junge had changed her position since then.
Yes, and I think it's actually, you want to know what he ate and stuff, because you kind of think, did he eat? Was he a human being?
Yeah.
And it's very important to know that he was.
Little details. Yeah.
I mean, they're obviously he's not what you call it by normal standards. He was not a normal human being. He obviously had extremism and maybe some mental problems, I mean, I don't know what leads you to that. That's one of the big questions. And one of the other questions that this film perhaps tries to answer is what made seemingly ordinary people, so not the Hitlers, but the Traudls and others, follow him.
It's not a black or white situation, but people find themselves on one part of the scale and they can move either way towards extremism or...
And the ultimate thing you ask yourself is, where would I be in this situation?
Yeah.
Because it takes incredible bravery to go against such a massive machine.
Also just to notice it. I mean, it'd be so easy to sign on as a job as a secretary, find yourself typing letters which contain a lot of... they won't say, we're going to murder 1 million people. They'll say, we're putting into operation this idea. And it'll all be language which you won't necessarily understand, or which you could easily decide not to understand at an unconscious level.
Oh, yes, yeah. And I think one of the things about Hitler was I think there certainly wasn't much in writing from himself about things like the concentration camps. He let others do that, but he implied heavily that others should do that.
Yeah.
Was he aware of it? Some defenders of Hitler, which they do exist, claim that he wasn't that involved in that part of it. It was his evil generals. But, I mean, my goodness, he laid the atmosphere for the hatred of Jewish people and gypsies and homosexuals and anyone else who was different.
Yeah.
I mean, in Mein Kampf, he railed against Jewish people, and, his speeches were full of anti-Semitism. And when they are demonised, those people are demonised to such an extent, perhaps you start to think it's true. There were more independently minded people, of course, and in fact, it's interesting that Traudl says one of the things that made her realise was
Sophie Scholl.
Yes, she saw a plaque commemorating her. I don't know if it was in Munich or Berlin or somewhere. And she saw, she was born the same year as her in 1920, so was the same age. But she was killed in 1943. She was an anti-Nazi activist.
Yeah, so she protested while Hitler was alive.
Yeah.
On his way up to power. In fact, there's a film called Sophie Scholl, also a German film, which is about her, her trial and execution. I think the Germans can
be a bit more proud of that part of history.
It shows that people did resist, and even young people. So that's the argument against...
But look what happened to her.
Yeah.
So you can imagine most normal people would want to keep their heads down.
Yeah.
Totally understandably. I've got to say it.
It's an impossible situation. There's no way to say, I'd have been a hero.
No. And people would love to say, there's this famous photo of a crowd of people doing the Nazi salute, I think, to Hitler, and there's one guy who's standing there with his hands in his pockets and looking... he has been identified, and people say, look at this hero. A lot of people like to think that would be me. I wouldn't be doing that. But when the possibility is death, and even if not for you, but your family.
Yes.
I mean that's how the Soviet regime under Stalin controlled people, was because you knew it wouldn't just be you, it would be your whole family who would disappear one night. Yeah. Awful times. And it's interesting that there are little echoes of it happening now, but people are much more aware, thanks to the Second World War, thanks to our lesson from history. People are more aware of what it means to stand up now, so more people do. And of course, we're nowhere near National Socialism.
No, not in this country.
Not in this country, yeah. Anyway, we'll try and steer away from...
We're not reviewing Hitler, we're reviewing this film.
Well, you've got to talk about him.
Yes.
Because it is mostly about... It centres around Hitler. It's kind of from the point of view, to some degree, from Traudl.
Yeah.
And it actually starts a couple of years before...
Yeah, most of it's set in 1945, obviously.
But we start to, I think she's hired in 1943, so we begin with 6 or 7 women being sort of auditioned for the role of secretary, and he takes a shine to her. Is it because she's born in Munich?
I think it was because
something like that.
Because he asks her to come in and type something, and she makes a mess of it because she's so nervous.
Yeah.
He's like the perfect boss. He says, let's try again. You think, what a nice man. In fact, I think that's one of the things that Wim Wenders, another German director, criticised the film for. He says, in the early scene, it makes you think Hitler's a nice man.
Yeah. But again, I think that's so important, and something this film does. Because, when you get some serial killer, and his neighbours all go, he seemed like such a nice person, or, everyone is to some degree.
And obviously he got to where he was partly through politics, obviously partly through terrorising people. But so he must have impressed various people in different ways.
Well, it's force of charisma. He had this thing. There's no doubt about it. Well, in some ways he did. In other ways he was quite a pathetic loner who didn't make friends easily. But he had some form of charisma. Not perhaps the Hollywood star charisma.
Yes, yeah.
But something. And, of course, the political times that he came to prominence in were post-World War I, where the Germans feel very embittered about the outcome of that. The deal they got, I should say, the deal they had to stick to, and the economy was bad in Germany, partly because of that, and Hitler came around and turned that all around. So, through not maybe the most humanist means... But I was going to say, I started to say this, it's so important that Germany made this. This is a German film rather than a foreign, an English-speaking viewpoint. And the fact that all they had to do was be as documentary as possible.
Yes, yeah.
They didn't have to put any kind of spin on it. and it kind of says everything. Brilliantly done. Now, it's interesting that when we go to the main part of the film, which is the last sort of, I don't know, was it 10 days or so of life in the bunker? So Berlin is surrounded by the Russians.
Yeah, they're 12 kilometres from Berlin.
And the headquarters of the Nazi Party have gone underground into this sort of air raid shelter. The bunker in the Reich Chancellery in Berlin.
Hitler initiates what he calls Operation Clausewitz, which is the government has to leave Berlin. And one of the things they have to do for that is that they destroy all paperwork.
Yes, so you see a lot of paperwork being burnt. And the other thing that Clausewitz said was defending Berlin to the last man and the last bullet.
Right, yeah.
Which is also what you kind of see. Just a little side note that isn't mentioned in the film is that Traudl actually married in 1943 to a German soldier, and he found being close to Hitler, because I think he was his valet or something, so stifling that he volunteered to go to the front to get away from it, and was killed the following year.
Because when we first see...
So she's a widow.
Yeah, when we first see her, Hitler addresses her as Frau Humps, which really confused me, because later on she's called Frau Junge.
Right. Okay, I didn't notice the change.
Yeah, I must admit, one of the things that I've seen this film twice recently, and one of the things that confused me the first time is that a lot of characters get either spoken about or appear briefly.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, who is that? and you're trying to work out who's who and what their significance is, because obviously a lot of these characters are major political figures.
Yes.
Or major figures in the war, and they might just come on, have a brief speech, and then leave, but something significant's happened.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to understand about this film.
Yes, and it being in German is another thing that makes it difficult perhaps for us. Yeah, I should say that this podcast will include spoilers if you hadn't seen Downfall. And the other little small print, perhaps we should say, is we're not military experts by any means, especially not historians about the Nazi Party, Hitler, or Germany during the Second World War. So apologies if we make any historical mistakes, if you're someone who is a bit more of an historian and recognises that we've made some terrible howlers during this, so we apologise.
But if we do make a mistake and you notice it, put a comment on our blog just to tell us, because we
absolutely,
like to learn.
Yes,
but we're trying our best.
Yeah. So most of the film is set in the bunker, and the bunker is so well done. You really feel the cramped atmosphere. And in fact, it was interesting seeing a photo of the set. It is all built in boxes.
Yes,
in like a warehouse or a sound stage or something. There were literally 4 walls in every room.
Oh, right.
And the camera crew would bundle in there with everyone else. And it really gives the feeling of being, stuck in this tiny little bunker.
Yeah. It's also, in a way, it acts as a metaphor for Hitler. Because towards the end, he's basically sitting there, looking at a map, shouting, bring this army here, bring that army there, and the armies don't exist.
Yeah.
So it's mentally, he's in a bunker.
Yeah.
He's completely separate from the real world, and he's ordering this and this.
Yeah, that's fascinating, actually. He sometimes he's saying, that's it, this is the end, everything's over. Yeah. And the other times he says, we can still do it, right, looking at the map, bring the 9th Army down and this general over here, to get him to get in. And everyone's looking around, staring, sweating away.
Yeah.
The reason they sweat, by the way, is because during his briefings, Hitler would turn off the ventilation.
Oh, really?
I presume maybe because of the noise, so he could be heard.
Oh.
But, you get up to 30 staff members in this tiny room and they'd all be sweating away.
Yeah.
None of them wanting to tell him no to anything. And that was a big part of the problem.
None of them wants to tell him the detail that will scupper his plan. Like, there are only, there's not enough soldiers in that army anymore, or they're stuck over there, And
sometimes they have to. And then he explodes.
Yeah.
And you get scenes like, well, there's this one that's famous that became a meme.
Yes, yeah.
Which was done thousands of times, I think, where Hitler's having one of his rants and people used the sound and the vision but put up their own subtitles. So it would be about something, innocuous, like I think the first one was something to do with someone complaining about the lack of updates on some Microsoft Flight Simulator. It was brilliant, but of course you end up seeing about 50 of them, and it comes to... I did wonder when watching that film, I thought, we're going to get to that scene, am I just going to find it ludicrous? But actually he's such a brilliant actor. Bruno Ganz who plays Hitler. I mean, what a job to play Hitler.
I was thinking, watching interviews with him, he actually grew the moustache.
Yeah.
They darkened it with makeup at some points. But I'm thinking, after he filmed, did he leave the set and go home with this moustache? I could almost imagine him putting on a false moustache just to extend the edges, you know.
Right.
Because that must be so emotive. I mean, seeing a man wearing Hitler, I don't know, maybe loads of people have those.
He didn't have the hairstyle in real life. He was kind of bald and he had a wig, which was very well done. But didn't comedian Richard Herring he went round with a real Hitler moustache for a while because it was part of a show he did, and I think he had some interesting experiences with that, going into shops and things.
It's weird, isn't it?
But this is in Germany, I presume.
Yeah.
But incredible, he really inhabited that role. It must do things to your brain. Physically, it's interesting as well because you see him shuffling around. I mean, I think he has his last birthday is part of the story.
Yes.
So I think he was 56, but he looks like a man in his late 70s.
Yeah.
As you say, he's mentally going, but he's physically going as well. And you see him with his shaking hand behind his back, which I think people thought that was Parkinson's. He possibly had Parkinson's disease and several other things wrong with him, but it didn't help the situation.
So early on we see Hitler meeting a lot of his top generals and other major figures, including Himmler.
Yes.
Obviously they know that the end of the war is in sight, because Himmler says maybe we should use politics. And Hitler says, I must force an outcome in Berlin or face my downfall.
Right. Which
is really, I mean, that's the start of the theme of the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hitler is refusing to give in or compromise, or he refuses to show any compassion, even towards his own people.
I mean, they become the focus of his blame, don't they? The German people didn't support him enough. That's part of the problem, he says. And they deserve what they're getting. So various people come to him with kind of compassionate pleas. What about the people? They haven't got food, they haven't got medical supplies. And each time he rails against them, they deserve this. They didn't support me. They brought this on themselves. Awful.
This reminds me a bit when we did the Platoon, the Vietnam film. I said that there, a lot of the action, even though it was a war film, we didn't actually see the enemy, as it were, a lot, and it was all about the drama in a platoon. You know, two characters were basically at odds.
Yes.
And here, again, we don't really see a lot of enemy. It's about one side picking on itself and tearing itself apart. Yeah.
There's kind of two camps, aren't there, amongst his staff. There's those who want to go behind his back and start talking to the Allies, the Russians and also the British and Americans. And there's those that are completely loyal to Hitler and the idea of fighting to the last man, the last bullet, and you do not go against his orders.
If he says it, we do it, even if it's impossible.
I mean, it's a cult.
Yeah.
And I think, referring back to how do people get into this kind of thing, that's how cults quite often work, is it's quite innocent at first, so you start out typing a letter that seems quite innocuous, for instance, and then before you know it, you're in a bunker with a man who's railing against the whole world and that everyone should die. And
also, I suppose it's military. I mean, in the military, you're trained to obey. And the thing about having politicians who are also military is you really want politicians to question, whereas the military are trained to obey. So if you've got people at the top, they just do what they're told, even if they're a major decision maker. You're not going to get any...
That's a good point, very good point. Yeah, it's interesting. And there's the idea that Hitler saw himself as a great military tactician, but actually wasn't. So he came up with a lot of ideas that were just awful. I mean, like... his attacking of the Soviet Union, for instance, was a disaster. And even when the winter was coming, he said, no, keep going. And destroyed such a large proportion of his army.
So another person that Hitler meets with in this meeting is Speer, who was an architect, but also at this point was the Ministry of Armaments and War Production. So he was the one who saw to all the bullets getting made.
Right.
And between them, they planned this complete redesign of Berlin.
Yeah, Germania, I think.
And Hitler's saying, one of the good things about Berlin being attacked is we're clearing the ground to build this
Yeah, at least we won't have to demolish buildings because they're being demolished for us by the Russians, basically, which is kind of hilarious.
And Hitler asks Speer, what do you think I should do? Should I leave Berlin? And Speer says, you must be on stage when the curtain falls.
Right.
So, I mean, everyone knows this is the end, and it's completely stupid to carry on, but Hitler's going to go on.
You kind of get the feeling with Speer that he kind of seems the voice of rationalism.
Yeah.
But only within this context. Yeah. Because then you remember that he was one of Hitler's best friends.
Well, he is sort of known as the Nazi who said sorry. Do you know about this?
Not really. I think maybe.
He was the only one of the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials who admitted the crimes.
Yeah, faced with the death penalty.
I mean, he didn't get the death penalty.
No, he died in London, didn't he? Yeah.
He said he didn't know about what happened to the Jews.
Yeah.
Although much later, apparently, in correspondence, they found out that he did know.
Oh. Yeah.
But so that's part of what got him a prison sentence rather than a death sentence.
Right.
Although he was found guilty on all 4 counts, including crimes against humanity.
Yes. Yeah.
So it is weird that in this context he comes across as mildly sane and sort of, like later on we find out that he hasn't obeyed everything Hitler's told him. But,
whenever he appears on screen, you think, I want to be with him. Like, if you're in there, take me with you. He does seem like the voice of the rationality.
Yeah, he's not completely taken in by Hitler, but
he's still a Nazi.
Yeah, the truth is that he was, he was 99% horrible, whereas Hitler was 100% horrible. It's just contrast.
And the other character you kind of feel that you'd want to be with in this situation, perhaps, is Schenk, Professor Dr. Schenk.
Oh yes, yeah.
Who at first I thought, gosh, he looks like Klaus Kinski, but so he's the doctor we see at one point, and he has quite a large, what seems to be humanitarian streak. He's going around, seems to have concern for the German people, wanting to do his best, but of course he's impotent in the face of Hitler and his generals not being able to do much. But again, he was a Nazi.
Yeah, I mean, I read his Wikipedia page, and there you find out that some of the things, like the heroic things he did, like working in a hospital or a sort of put-together hospital where he didn't know about surgery, but he performed all the surgery because there was no one else to do it.
Yeah. Was that true? He did do
that?
Yes,
yeah. In fact, the other doctor who we see him with was
Dr. Haas
was too ill to perform some surgery, and so he'd lie there and tell him what to do.
Right.
But also, apparently, he was high up in the SS, and there are bad things said about him.
He started before the war. He was a food safety inspector.
Oh God!
And then this probably happened to quite a few people in various, perhaps middle management or high management roles in various organisations. Yeah. Suddenly found themselves with SS uniforms and heading up departments of death destruction and whatever. And if you were a doctor, you'd quite often be involved in experiments and things like that. Well, maybe not quite often, but you certainly got drawn into not just saving people, but killing people.
Yeah. But he's one of the other story strands. So we've got Hitler in the bunker.
Yeah.
We've got Schenk, who we see out and about in Berlin quite a lot.
Yeah.
And there's another brief story strand that gets introduced at this point, which is a young boy, about 12. Or maybe younger, who's a soldier.
Yes.
When we see him, he's already destroyed 2 enemy tanks.
Peter, I think his character name is.
I never found his name.
And of course, I mean, the good thing is, if we keep asking ourselves, was that true? It almost certainly is, because the research done for this film was so good.
Yeah.
And that is true. As Berlin was being attacked and there were hardly any soldiers left, children were recruited and given bazookas to attack. I think there was something like 20 or 30 German tanks in Berlin and 15,000 Soviet tanks or something coming in. So the odds were not good.
Yeah.
But one of the last times Hitler went out of the bunker on his last birthday was to give medals to some of these children.
Right, yeah.
Of which a photo exists
of
this thing, and they use that to reference the scene. The director said in the photo the boys just looked so knackered, and he wanted the children to. There weren't as many children in the film. There's like 7 or 8, I think. In the photo, there's more like 20 or something, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, a real thing that happened. It's interesting that the film, all those exteriors were filmed in St. Petersburg. in Russia, and they did an incredible job. It's in the centre of St. Petersburg, what would normally be a 4-lane traffic street.
Oh, right.
They closed off for a week and a half or something, 2 weeks, 9 days or something, and turned it into this war zone. Oh. And most of the non-speaking extras are Russians.
Oh, right.
The boy Peter is German, because he's got some speaking to do, but the other boys in that lineup that get medals, for instance, are all Russian. Oh. And people lived in that street. And so when they had to film at night, there were no lights allowed.
Lamps, yeah.
No lights coming from windows.
Oh, right.
Because who would still be living there, right? They'd have all gone. But of course, people in St. Petersburg, they were people's family homes. And they had two options, the production crew. They could ask St. Petersburg electricity board to cut the electricity, or they could go to each family and ask them not to turn their lights on, which is what they did. And they did. The families did that. They complied. Wow. And they put up with explosions. I think they had one complaint when a particularly large explosion actually broke a window. But you can see in some of the production footage, explosions go off and then all these car alarms go off from the Russian cars. But it's also interesting because, of course, the history between Germany and Russia, and St. Petersburg was blockaded for a massive amount of time. Right. And people froze and starved to death in St. Petersburg at the hands of the German army. And so I find it quite moving that there was this cooperation on the film. You know, and they can't say enough good things about the people of St. Petersburg. It's particularly the extras, the crew they used, and the people who lived in this street. Yeah. And, you know, they were able to do things in St. Petersburg that they couldn't have done back in Germany to these buildings. And one of the interesting things was St. Petersburg was a lot of German architects worked in the city, so it had a fairly Germanic look. Anyway, they had to do some work to perhaps make it look a bit more like central Berlin, but not a lot. So anyway, I found that aspect of the production really fascinating.
Yes, we can't really go through this scene by scene because there's a lot of details.
No, I think generally, you know, I mean, there's some standout scenes. Obviously, one of the main characters we haven't mentioned is Eva Braun.
Yeah, that's who I was going to come to next.
Yeah.
Apparently Eva Braun was not politically minded at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you just got to accept that. In the film, she comes across as, to me, she looks slightly manic in the eyes.
Yes.
And, you know,
well, that scene where she's, right, we're having a party.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my God.
So she's basically Hitler's girlfriend, really, but marries him later on in the film. And it's like she doesn't seem to notice that there's a war going on.
Maybe. I mean, I agree. The look in her eyes sometimes, she's slightly psychotic. She's got an oblivious, lack of respect for what's going on around her. I mean, maybe deep down she does, but her character does seem very odd. And she did try to commit suicide twice.
Oh, right.
Before, in her early relationship with Hitler.
Oh.
The first time was to try and get him to, people think, to get Hitler to notice her more.
Right.
So they reckon that they weren't serious attempts to end her life. They were attention-grabbing things, but directed towards Hitler. Right. So she tried to shoot herself with her father's pistol and failed. But it had the desired effect on Hitler, who paid more attention to her. And again, she felt she wasn't having enough attention paid to her. She took some sleeping pills, and then Hitler bought her and her sister a lovely house, and, you know...
right.
And there was another story, I think Hitler ordered... that I might be getting this slightly wrong, but, you know, cosmetics and handbags and stuff should, you know, stop making them. They're not important. Right. And that was it for her because that's what she was interested in, parties and these frivolous things. So Hitler changed the order to, rather than banning them, just to slow down production or stop production temporarily or something. Okay. But yeah, really interesting character. She worked for the official photographer of the Nazi Party.
Oh, right.
In the late 1920s. And that's how she met Hitler. And when Hitler's niece shot herself in his apartment, who he was very close to, that's when he then turned his affections more to Eva Braun.
Yeah, so her introductory scene, I don't think we might see her before, but it's where they're in the bunker and she suddenly says, let's have a party.
Yeah.
Actually, they're not in the bunker, are they? Cause
they go into the Reich Chancellery, I think, right, the main building. The bunker's in the grounds of that. Yeah. It was built as a temporary air raid shelter in the 30s for Hitler. Oh. And then during the war, it was added to.
Right.
And it's an interesting thing because, you know, there was a first layer which was obviously the original air raid shelter, and then I think they built more of it a bit deeper underground
to be a sort of operations centre.
Yeah, and the Soviets tried to destroy it after the war and couldn't. They didn't. They couldn't. They half destroyed it, and in fact, it was. I think even today, a few rooms exist under a park or a car park or something. But you can't go and look at it because, of course, as with a lot of these things, they don't want neo-Nazis turning these places into shrines and that sort of thing. But it was recognised. There's a small plaque outside, I think, which was put up there during, I can't remember if it was some Olympics or World Cup or something.
So then we get another character, General Wiedling. I don't know, I'm not very good at the pronunciation.
Yeah.
He's on the front line, and he receives a phone call telling him that he's going to be shot for retreating.
Yes.
And he says, but I haven't retreated. So he goes straight to Hitler.
He marches into the bunker, doesn't he? Says, covered in dust.
Yeah, it says, apparently I'm to be shot.
Yeah.
This impresses Hitler, who now realises that he didn't retreat. So Hitler says, right, we're going to put you in charge of the defence of Berlin. Whereupon Wiedling says, I'd rather be shot.
Yeah. Yes, that's a great line, isn't it?
So this is a man who's basically a soldier, a grizzled soldier.
Yeah.
He's not an SS... I mean, he might be in the SS, but he's not like a politician at all.
No.
He's on the front line.
Yeah. Yeah, he's another one you think, perhaps I'd like to be close to him during this, although he is right in the thick of it.
And shortly after that, then we get Hitler's first major rant, I think.
Right.
He thinks that Steiner will halt the Russians, but everyone knows that Steiner doesn't have enough troops, so as soon as Hitler starts finding out, he immediately calls everyone around him traitors and cowards.
Yeah.
That's in one room of the bunker, but everyone outside can hear him ranting, and they're all starting to look worried.
Yes, yeah. There's several times when he has a rant, and one of the most common words he uses, traitors and betrayal, and everyone's a traitor. It's the classic paranoia of your psychotic leader. Everyone's against him.
Also, there's an interesting scene around here where Frau Junge, that she's been told several times that she should just leave. Even Hitler says you can leave. But one of the reasons she gives for not doing so is because her family told her a long time ago, apparently, that she shouldn't work for Hitler.
Right.
And if she says, if I go home, that'll be admitting they're right.
Right.
So it's obviously she's at this point where she doesn't want to admit she's wrong. So it's not entirely the best reasons for staying.
No, I think, again, it's this kind of cult feeling. I mean, this isn't explicit so much, but cults kind of turn you against people who are outside the cult.
Yes, yeah.
There is that feeling. You know, if you're not in the inner circle, you're against us. And then that's the power of keeping you in the inner circle, because you don't want to be against them because the cost is so great. You lose your family inside the circle, your colleagues, and you lose your real family outside the circle. It's a very powerful, motivating force, I think, that is used by various, mostly religious organisations. And this was Hitler was a kind of a religious figure.
Yeah, people believed in him.
Exactly, yeah. And we meet Goebbels around this time.
Yes.
And what a great actor for him. His eyes, talking of psychotic eyes with Eva Braun, they go up several notches with Goebbels. I mean, he has the eyes of a shark. I mean, this is the actor we're talking about, so I apologise to him, but he
is a very well chosen actor.
Yeah. He's scary. He's scary to look at, and it mirrors the character of Goebbels so well.
And Goebbels was like a second Hitler. And he was his minister of propaganda. It's like he wants to be Hitler.
Well, once Hitler was dead, of course, he did become the Chancellor, didn't he?
Yeah.
For several days.
But also, he completely agrees with everything Hitler says. And, I mean, here he says, the German people have chosen their fate. We didn't force the German people; they gave us the mandate, and now their little throats are being cut. It's like he's saying they can't blame us because they put us in charge.
Exactly, yeah, that's really interesting. And where Goebbels sticks with Hitler, absolutely. Even people like Hitler eventually rails against him because Himmler goes off to
try and make a deal. Yeah.
So he's a traitor.
Yeah. But Goebbels, I mean, in a sense, he's even worse. He brings his family in.
This is the worst. I know we're jumping ahead, but we'll jump around with this.
Yeah.
The worst part of the film for me, amongst all the bad stuff, But yeah, as soon as you bring children in, so yeah, he brings his family. Is it 6 children? These little angels, Nazi angels. I mean, they are your Aryan, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, but they're children. Children brought up in a cult don't know any better. And yeah, my God, it's his wife.
Yeah, Magda Goebbels.
She's the one who comes up with the idea. She says several times, there's no point in living if there's no Hitler or there's no National Socialism. Yeah. What's the point in bringing up children if there's no National Socialism? I mean, to get to that stage where you'd kill your own children for an ideology is incredible.
She's obviously she thinks there's no future if Hitler dies. Yes.
I cannot relate. A lot of things you can relate to on some level, even if they're bad. This I cannot relate to at all. It's incredible. And that scene where, first of all, they give them, I don't know if it's poison or a sleeping draft. Yeah. And of course, the eldest girl, Helga, she knows what's happening.
Yeah, she doesn't want to take it.
That's difficult to watch, isn't it? Really hard. And then, while they're sleeping, she feeds them these poison capsules.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it goes on too long. I mean, it doesn't. It's important.
Yeah.
But you think, oh, please get this over with. It's just the worst.
It's all, I mean, all the stuff that's not said. Like Goebbels stands outside while she does it, and she comes out, and I think she actually...
Not a tear shed by either of them.
It's obvious from her sort of body language that she did this, he had no part in it, and it's like she thinks he's a coward.
Well, he didn't stop her.
Yeah.
And I think historically he disagreed at first and then went along with it. Yeah, great. But there's the scenes earlier that you know what's going to happen because this is history. So the scene earlier where they're all singing. They're like the anti-Von Trapps. They're the cute little singing family singing a song for Hitler.
Uncle Hitler.
And it's this sweet childhood innocence, and yet you know what's going to happen. That's the power of that in this film is incredible. Really is. This is one of the things that makes it difficult to just sit down and watch as entertainment, but shows you the importance of art being used in this way. I think films being made like this. Yeah, you shouldn't always watch easy films, brainless things, because just being in a documentary style, how can an opinion be formed just by looking at facts? Well, obviously your own experience and context form the opinions from what you're looking at. Are there people out there who watch this film thinking, oh, poor old Hitler, oh, if only that hadn't happened. Yes, you're right to kill the children. Of course, it's all... I mean, are there people like that who have Downfall in their collections as a kind of completely different film to the way that we have Downfall?
Yeah.
It's don't like to think about it, but it's probably true somewhere.
To draw a connection between that, outside in Berlin, there's 2 young soldiers, a girl and a boy, who are probably young teens or mid-teens, who realise that the end is near, and the girl asks to be shot.
Yeah.
The boy shoots her and then shoots himself.
I think that's Peter's sister. Because they were
seen together.
Yeah, and I think it's the father that comes to say, come back.
Yeah.
What are you doing? He's got one arm because he's been on the front. I don't know whether that's First World War veteran or... I think he's probably been on the front in the Second World War, but I don't know. Yeah, and he criticises them, saying, his view is the war's over, this is stupid, children are just dying for no reason, and his children are there.
Yeah.
And his son is ashamed of him for not fighting for the cause and runs off. But I think the girl is his daughter and Peter's sister.
Oh, right, yeah.
She was a Russian actress.
Oh, right.
Which I don't think she said anything in the film, because that shooting, she may have, I don't know.
I think she does ask.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But she's a Russian actress, actually, one of the Russians. And certainly the scene where she dies, Eva Braun's writing a letter, I think.
Right.
And so it's silent, played under Eva Braun's narration of her letter.
Yeah.
That she's writing to her parents or her sister. Her sister, I think.
That's one of the things about it being, obviously it's a subtitled film, is that I might have absorbed her asking to be shot.
Yeah, you do.
In silent film style,
Yes. It's interesting with subtitled films. I always find this. You start, all right, I'm reading, I'm watching, I'm reading, I'm watching. And then 10 minutes in, you're...
just absorbing.
You are, subconsciously doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is, interesting. Yeah, and then the boy shoots himself.
Yeah.
But after, he kind of seems to hesitate at first. And also, while we're out there, there's these gangs of vigilantes going around hanging people who they think, or they perceive as not to have been to have been perhaps colluding with the Russians or not doing enough to defend Berlin.
But they're basically getting civilians who they think could have been acting as soldiers, old men, for instance, and hanging them as deserters.
Yeah,
when in fact they're just civilians.
It's a mob.
Yeah.
And the leader of them is this large, ham-faced guy in this German hat. I mean, you can kind of... there's British people who are a bit like him.
Yes.
You know, these kind of angry, everybody, get off my garden. But you can recognise that kind. I can just see some of these people, the kind of... what are they called? The gammon-faced gang that you see on Question Time. These middle-aged older men with red faces who hate anything left of, far right. Yes. Read the Daily Mail. And they'd be out there wearing their, I don't know, what's the equivalent of that German hat with a little feather in. But, as soon as you see him, you kind of hate him.
Yeah.
And it's so petty. At the end, everything's finished to go around, and they get Peter's.
Yeah, they get Peter's parents
because he goes back home after realising that everything's.
Yeah. There's
no choice anymore. He gets out of his uniform, goes home, and finds his parents dead.
Yeah.
And we see him again at the end, of course.
Yeah. After this, there's one of these switches that happens, and Hitler starts to rally. So after seeming to give up, he says to one of his generals or someone, "We must get our oil fields back." And you think, it's like he's planning so far ahead that, obviously he knows something,
Yes. There's a lot of suicide in this film, isn't there, as well?
Yeah.
I mean, because there's also around this time, Hitler is discussing suicide.
Yeah, how to do it.
He's got these two thought streams going on at the same time. Should you use a gun or poison?
Yeah.
And there's lots of people who commit suicide out in the field, and in the bunker is after Hitler's done it.
Yeah.
It happens a few times.
Yes.
There's a lot of paintings on the walls of the bunker, valuable art, which was brought down from the Reich Chancellery. And there's a scene where Hitler's staring at one, and I wondered who that was and looked it up afterwards. It's Frederick the Great, which is one of Hitler's heroes.
I assumed it was. I didn't know who it was, so I just assumed he was. And it's shortly after that he rallies, I think. It's like he's looking at one of his... I remember that, he's looking at one of his heroes and thinking, what would he do?
Yeah.
And then it's almost like, he enters a fantasy world and thinks, maybe we can win.
Right, yeah.
We must get our oil fields back. But then after that, he gets a telegram from Field Marshal Goering saying, because he hasn't heard from Hitler for a while, should he take control? And Hitler is furious and orders him executed.
Yes.
For questioning his authority. And then Speer arrives again.
Yeah.
So he goes to see Hitler.
Because Hitler thought Speer had abandoned him.
Yeah.
But then he comes back, he realises he hasn't. But then Speer's come back to tell him he's leaving.
Yeah, and not only that, he says... I mean, in a way, this is quite brave. This is what none of his other the generals would do, but you've got to say that in context, because, nasty man. But he says, I think I should tell you that for the past few months I haven't been obeying your order to destroy things. I can't remember if it was destroying buildings or something, but he hasn't been following his orders for the last few months, so... I don't know, does that make him slightly better than Hitler?
Yeah. He offers his hand to Hitler, who refuses to shake it.
Yeah. And, Hitler says, the one thing he's proud of is that he openly confronted the Jews. Yeah, there's
a couple of times he mentions that.
Yeah.
So it is mentioned, but when Speer leaves the Reich Chancellery, there's some music playing, and I thought, I recognise that.
Oh, yeah.
And at first I thought, is it Foiré's Requiem? And then I thought, no, it's it really sounds like Dido's Lament from Henry Purcell, which is in English.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not. It's music that was scored for the film, and it's used a couple of times. But it's really very similar to Dido's Lament. My favourite bits of music, which is why I recognised it. But fitting. At first, I thought it was a requiem, and I thought, that's fitting.
Yeah.
But so's Dido's Lament, perhaps.
Now, then we get another generals arriving, a dinner scene with Hitler, and this is another point where he suddenly enters a fantasy world. And he says that he allowed the invasion of Berlin and it's all a trick to lure the Russians in so that he can catch them in a massive pincer movement. Yeah. And for a moment, the general he's talking to, you can see him, because the general had obviously decided everything was over and he'd come back to the bunker to die with Hitler.
Right.
And it's like you're thinking, oh, maybe that's true. You know, even though this general probably knows the situation outside the bunker a lot better than Hitler.
Yeah.
He's thinking, you know, you can see that how, such is their belief in Hitler, that if Hitler told them, you know, tap dancing elephants were coming with machine guns were coming to save them, they go, maybe it's true, you know.
Yes. There's a bit where he says compassion is, I can't remember exactly what he says, compassion is a weakness, basically. It's against nature. Yeah. And which kind of gets this false idea of Darwinism, which it isn't. Yeah. But this, what's it called, survival of the fittest kind of thing. And the Germans are proving themselves, after all, not to be the fittest, so they deserve to die because, you know, the stronger ones will survive.
I mean, he even says that, it might be Goebbels who says, the way that the strong survive and the way that you prove that you're strong is by defeating the weak. Right. No compassion is... I was thinking, watching this, you know, what sort of a film is it? Obviously, it's a war film, but how would you class the story? And I was thinking, the thing that I immediately think of it is as a tragedy. Yeah. But obviously, you can't really apply that, because a tragedy, certainly in the modern sense, is something bad that shouldn't have happened, you know, like someone dies too young. Right, yeah. And then in the Shakespearean sense, you know, like you've got Macbeth and so on, where you've got a figure like a prince or a king who it's their downfall, right, but through some fault of their own. Yeah. And even and in those situations, even though like Macbeth does evil, he kills a king. There's a sense of something noble that might have been good, which is lost. Right. I was thinking, but that you really can't say that about this situation, because Hitler dies, the whole SS regime falls through its own fault. But the thing is, if you think of it as a tragedy for Germany, Germany, their fault was that they decided to believe in this idea of Hitler, right, and taking the path of no compassion towards their enemies. Yeah. But then that no compassion gets turned on them. Yeah. So really it is a tragedy. Hitler falls, but it's the German people who suffer. Yeah. That was my take on this. Yes, I like that. That works. Yeah. And maybe using that word tragedy in the scene that follows is Dr. Gravitz. Oh, yes. Who's this rather horrible historical figure who I believe experimented on trying to cure homosexuality, as they believed, and euthanized people, and was involved in the killing of, you know, either physically disabled people or people with mental illness before the war started. I think it was the T4 project or something. He was involved in that. Yeah. And Hitler says he doesn't give him permission to leave Berlin. Yeah. So he has one last meal with his family, and incredibly, I mean, it's horrible. Again, you see the child, playing with a doll, feeding her doll some soup or something, and he watches his family while under the table he's taking the pins out of 2 grenades. Yeah, and obviously they go off and kill his entire family. It's not quite as stark as the Goebbels family death, but still the same sort of thing. It's a weird situation because you're introducing the character so quickly. He's saying to Hitler, "Oh, please, can I leave?" Hitler says no, and so he goes home and kills his family. Oh, he could have left, surely. Yeah. He could have escaped. But he didn't want to be caught because of the experiments. Yeah. So he's a horrible person. Is that the one where Hitler says, "You did nothing wrong," or was it another doctor? Yeah, he says, Hitler says, "I will take full responsibility." Yeah, you did nothing wrong. So what? Yeah. But if you just watch that scene, you'd perhaps feel sympathy for him. Certainly for his family. But, I mean, basically, the rest of the film is kind of seeing the end of various people now. And one of the others is Hermann Fegelin. Oh, yes. Who's Eva Braun's, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that brother-in-law. That's right. He married Eva Braun's sister. He is Himmler's adjutant. Yeah, and he agrees with Himmler. In fact, they conflab at the beginning about going to talk to the Allies, and he's one of the ones who's on the side of thinking that this is the end, we should give up and try and save as many lives as possible. Political solution. Yeah. When he realises that's not going to happen, he goes out and gets drunk and has a night in bed with a woman, and Hitler sends out a party to arrest and shoot him, which they do. Because he's supposed to be the link to Himmler, and Himmler has, according to Hitler, betrayed Hitler. So this is the one of the few times we see Eva Braun she begs for his life.
Yes.
Because obviously he's her brother-in-law.
And I think her sister is pregnant as well with the child. Yeah. I think that's right.
And Hitler refuses this request, and Eva Braun obviously just decides to go with it.
Yeah.
Hitler is still ranting on about ghost armies out there, the 9th and the 12th. Wenck will come, he says. He's got all his hopes based on this army, which doesn't exist at all in the numbers necessary.
There's a military update where someone says something like there's 20,000 dead, and Hitler says that's what young men are for.
Yeah.
It's all numbers to him.
Yeah.
It's there's a greater, in quotes, good for his ideology.
I thought after this, it's difficult to call it comedy, but there's a sort of, I can't even call it light-hearted, but there's a moment where, first of all, Hitler dictates his political testament, which is like his last public statement.
Yes.
And so Frau Junge is typing, first she takes it in shorthand, and later you see her typing it up. And then Goebbels arrives, and he wants to dictate his testament.
Yeah.
She says, I'm typing up Hitler's. And it's like Goebbels is like the second naff Hitler.
Yes.
He arrives and says, I want to make my last statement. Oh, you can't, I'm doing Hitler's. Oh, right.
Doesn't he cries at that point, doesn't he?
Hitler ordered him to go away.
Right.
I mean, to leave Berlin.
Yes.
And he says, why is he sending me away?
Yeah,
you know?
but he actually cries. I mean, goodness me. So he doesn't cry to the death of his children.
No.
But he cries when Hitler orders him to go.
And then Eva and Hitler marry.
Yes.
And there's another minor comic scene where the man brought in to marry them says, have you got any ID? Yeah. He's a Führer.
Are you of pure Aryan descent?
Yeah. These are the questions, obviously, that people have to answer before they're married. But, so it's after that Hitler learns that all his belief in Wenck and the 12th and 9th armies these armies don't exist.
Yeah.
The Russians are 20 hours away. Still he's saying, I'm never going to surrender. He's obviously knows that he's going to die. He says he doesn't want his body exhibited in a museum.
Yes.
So he gets one of his more loyal sort of servants.
Yeah, Gunch, I think his name is.
He asks him to see to it. So Gunch requisitions 200 litres of petrol to burn Hitler and Eva's bodies.
Yeah.
The doctors are brought from the hospital where they're doing...
Yes.
They're trying to... I always think about this. Both doctors are brought from this hospital where they're doing good, vital work.
Yeah, this is Schenk and Haas.
Yeah, to tell Hitler...
And a nurse.
How to kill himself. Yeah, she gets hysterical. She obviously realises...
In the face of Hitler, she kind of loses it.
Yeah.
Says, please lead us. I don't know if it's just the presence of him. She is obviously one nurse to two doctors. She's probably been working 24 hours a day for months. But again, it's this cult feeling. Yeah. This blind loyalty. And the bunker is just full of blinkered madmen, all crowded in with this unquestioning loyalty to the lead madman, too scared to confront Hitler. So the madness continues.
As they follow people through the bunker, approaching Hitler, it's almost like you pass these... There's a bunch of drunk people, and then there's a bunch of people who are staring into space thinking, we're going to win, we're going to win, there's going to be... And then you pass some more drunk people.
I don't know if anyone actually thinks they're going to win, apart from Hitler occasionally.
They're thinking, this cannot be happening. They're just... It's quite like the end of Apocalypse Now, where you get to the the point where they find Colonel Kurtz, and it's all madness,
Yeah, great. They test poison on Hitler's dog Blondie.
Oh, they're testing it. I just assumed that he was another one who can't live, after beyond Hitler.
Well, maybe partially true. I mean, Hitler absolutely loved that dog.
Yeah.
I think some people even thought he perhaps loved animals more than... Well, he certainly didn't seem to love people.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I thought it was a kind of a test to see how quickly, show Hitler how quickly it worked.
Right.
Wasn't it when Hitler was asking Haas about how the best way to kill himself... And he was saying, bite the poison, then shoot yourself.
Yeah, because Hitler's hand was shaking. He thought, what if I shoot myself and miss, or don't do a good job?
Yeah. So Hitler then he actually says goodbye to all the staff, doesn't he?
Yeah. Shaking hands. And there's a conversation between Junge and Eva. I can't remember which one says, Hitler, he can be such a caring person, but then he says such things.
That's quite another little comedy moment, is when Eva Braun says she sometimes kicks the dog.
Yes.
She hates that dog. Sometimes when Hitler's not looking, she kicks it, and then Hitler wonders why his behaviour is all strange.
And then they have a last meal. It's the three... I mean, Eva's not there for some reason. It's the three secretaries, or the woman, one's a cook.
Yeah.
And Hitler wolfs down his last meal.
Yeah. Vegetarian, famously.
Yeah.
Who also hated smoking, so There's a lot, obviously.
Teetotaler. One person called him a vegetarian, non-smoking teetotaler.
Yes, that's what happens when you get a non-smoking. Yeah, but and there's various people smoking. And then when Hitler comes along, they quickly hide the cigarettes and stuff. And there's one scene when they're burning books and Gunch is smoking, and Hitler comes up behind him and he quickly throws it into the fire.
Right, yeah, I saw them doing it, but I didn't associate that. Yeah. Anyway, then it happens. 30th of April 1945. Hitler kills himself.
Yes.
I mean, there's a moment where Frau Goebbels begs him not to, but...
they knock on the door when he's in there. He looks mightily pissed off that he's been interrupted in his last moments with Eva Braun.
It's one of those moments where, the front of belief in him, Frau Goebbels, obviously she knows that when he dies...
Yeah.
It's going to be her children and her. I mean, this is the one time she shows any sign of emotion towards that idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult to tell if it could be that she's more concerned that they're losing Hitler.
Yes.
I mean, she seems to be...
Definitely. Yeah.
Rather than her own children.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a series of unbelievable events, isn't it? This thing of... I mean, what makes the news now when something bizarre and awful happens, if someone kills themselves, it's, this was happening every... 20 minutes or so. Newsworthy stories. Newsworthy. But tragedies all over the place. Just too many to count, I'm sure. So they kill themselves and the bodies are burnt.
Yeah, outside.
And, right outside the front of the bunker in a little ditch.
Yeah.
And the Russians did recover the ashes, I think.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. And the dental records were checked, so it was kind of confirmed.
So he didn't escape to the moon.
Yeah, or South America, as some people believe. There's some documents that kind of mention the possibility, but I think it's fairly... I mean, it's so well documented from people who were there and these dental records, which maybe are not necessarily definite evidence, but are pretty good.
Yeah.
There's no way he survived. It's too well documented from various sources. But that is a conspiracy theory, of course, that exists.
So after that, the generals go to speak to the Russians to say, we can talk about surrender.
Yeah.
And this is where the Russians say, there's no talking about it, it's unconditional surrender or nothing.
Yeah, because they know they're going to win.
Yeah,
They've got all the cards.
What have the Germans got to bargain with?
Yeah. There's a brilliant scene that was filmed but not used.
Oh, right.
Because the Russian they went to see, I don't know if it was Marshal Zhukov or someone, it might not have been him, but at the time the Germans arrived, he had no military officers with him. He only had some artists and composer, strangely enough. Frontline artists who were taking pictures and paintings of what was going on. And... some of them had... I don't know if they hastily put uniforms on and sat next to him.
To present a front.
But there was one who didn't have a uniform, so he hid in a cupboard in the room. And the meeting went on for hours, and he ran out of oxygen, and halfway through the meeting, or towards the end, he fell out the cupboard. And the Russians, all they did was they got up, picked him up, took him out of the room, and then the meeting continued with everyone. The Germans didn't even question it. Just halfway through this meeting, this guy falls out of a cupboard.
That was the last meeting I had.
Yes. But they did film it, but he decided it was so bizarre and strange that he decided he had to cut various, so that was one of the things he cut, just because he thought people just won't believe it, or you'll have to explain too much.
You don't want to laugh at that point.
But
So they're sent back, and then this is when we see Goebbels' children being killed.
Yeah, we've discussed that.
And then
the Goebbels shoot themselves. Yeah. Well, Goebbels shoots his wife.
And then himself. And then they're burnt.
Yeah.
It's got to be like Hitler, you see, even up to the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then finally, Frau Junge and the other secretary, Gerda, leave. People are now leaving the bunker. Yes. Others are shooting themselves. I mean, it's like...
It's kind of a breakout there. And they dress themselves in...
Yeah, they are soldiers.
Soldiers. Yeah. I think... more for practicality than because when Traudl decides to leave the group and try and make it, because the two secretaries, one is going to stay and the other one decides to leave, and that's when Peter comes back into it. I didn't realise it was Peter at first. I just thought it was another boy.
It was only on the second watch of the film, because the first watch of the film, a lot of it I was thinking, who is that character? And it was only on the second watch of the film that I realised that's why the boy had been introduced earlier on. I mean, obviously it tells you what's going on in Berlin, but he is the boy you see right at the end. So his story gets threaded through the whole thing.
I presume I didn't actually do any checking on that. Is that a fictional thing, or was there really a boy who suddenly appeared out of nowhere?
I can't imagine that they'd invent seeing them at the end.
I don't know. It's kind of a neat... I can imagine they might invent that bit.
Yeah.
Because I have to look it up after this, but it's kind of a neat little joining up of various strands and allows her to leave more easily. It looks... Although I'm surprised they let anyone walk through all those Russians, but they did.
Yeah.
I think in reality she didn't actually get very far, and she was arrested by the Russians, and then she was handed over to the Americans and interviewed, and but eventually she settled and lived out the rest of her life, dying in 2002. Yeah,
at the end of the film there's an update, one of these, what happened to each person, and a lot of them, obviously the major ones were arrested, and a lot of them died in Russian prisons, but then quite a lot of them survived into like the 2000s.
Yes, the 70s, 80s. As I said, Speer died in 1980, I think, in London. The two main military defenders of Berlin, Monk and Velding, were taken by the Russians back and imprisoned, and they didn't survive because they had sentenced to 20 years and 25 years, and they died in Soviet captivity. I think that might have been the same with Haas, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because both Haas and Velding are shown to be ill in the film, and they both die.
In fact, Velding collapses. Doesn't he make the announcement of
surrender? Yeah,
in Berlin, and then he asks for a drink of water and then collapses straight away.
Yeah, but Dr. Haas is ill, and he dies shortly afterwards, I think.
And the other two main characters, Krebs and Bergdorf, who, we can't really single them out, but they've got a lot to do. They're back in the bunker. They're sort of like the last two to shoot themselves. Yeah, they do it together and sat down in one of the corridors. But a lot did survive for a fair while. Yeah, that's basically it. So downfall.
It's weird for a war film to be so aware of each death. But, no one, or not no one, but very few people are just mown down as, you'd think of the baddies.
Yeah, it does happen in some of the outside scenes. There's bodies everywhere in the street scenes, rubble and bodies in almost every shot. And smoke and fire. It's very well done. And of course, I think being able to film that in St. Petersburg in an actual, not on a set, made that very realistic. And a lot of the lighting they used the same lighting they had back then.
Oh, right.
So they had, in the bunker, they used bulbs that were pretty much identical to the bulbs they had. And a lot of the things were lit by firelight, so you had that flickering light, and they used very little. The artificial light they used was close to natural light, so one of the outside lights they used was very similar to moonlight. So its realism goes from the facts of the narrative right down to the kind of environment they used. Such a well done film. Did it win Oscars? It was definitely nominated.
Oh, right, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if it did. Another thing I didn't check, but have to look up.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of the war films we've covered have dealt with, you got the people at the top who are removed from the action, and we usually follow the people who then carry out their orders, and there's a sense that all the people at the top, they're just staying behind. You know, they're a minor presence most of the time. Here, it's all about the people at the top, really, or almost all of it. Getting their comeuppance.
But kind of, it focuses on so many interesting aspects of it, like the confined madness and the political ideology gone crazy and
completely obeying,
and the people. What would you do? There's that question again, which has come up a few times in the. Well, it came up mostly in It Happened Here. We were talking about that.
Yes, yeah.
It was interesting. I was going to say about Bruno Ganz, who played Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
Was in two other films that are worth mentioning, I think. One's The Boys from Brazil.
Oh, right.
Which would have been an interesting one to do, actually, although it's set, I think, in the 70s.
Yeah.
And that's where they're trying to clone
Hitler,
aren't they? I don't know who he played in that, but it's a very good film. It's one of my... I've watched that a few times.
Oh, right.
Has that got Laurence Olivier in, I think, hasn't it? And a film I saw recently called Remember. Have you heard of that? It's only from 2015.
I don't think so.
It's got Christopher Plummer and another actor. I can't remember who it was. Anyway, there's these two old guys in an old people's home.
Yeah.
And they're both Auschwitz survivors.
Oh, right.
And one of them is so incapacitated he can't leave. And the other one has got quite bad Alzheimer's, but has moments of lucidity. And he escapes from the old people's home with the agreed mission from the other guy to go and find one of the camp commandants from Auschwitz and kill him.
Oh, right.
Now, there's a really good twist. I've heard people say it's a rubbish film. I actually really enjoyed it, and I didn't see the twist coming. There's a good twist.
Right.
And Bruno Ganz is in that as well, because Christopher Plummer, who goes out, buys this gun. He's an old, forgetful man, but he's found like 4 candidates. So you see him going around each one.
Oh, right.
And Bruno Ganz plays the second one, who actually turns out to have been a homosexual who himself was in the concentration camp.
Yeah.
And Christopher Plummer meets him in a hospital where he's dying or something. I recommend it, actually.
Oh, right.
I won't give away the twist. It's good. It's a good film.
No,
so he was
in that.
He also played the angel in Wings of Desire.
Oh, yes.
Which I saw once, and
I saw it with you. I think we saw it with some other people, and I remember falling asleep.
Oh, I did not enjoy it. It's hailed as a classic, and maybe I should give it another go, but it's going to take me a lot to build. I'd have to have nothing else to do. That's terrible. I'm sure Wings of Desire actually is probably a good film. It may have been the circumstances, but yeah, he played the angel in that film as well.
And that's Wim Wenders who who criticised this film.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so anything else to say on Downfall? I think we did a lot of discussion of the actual thing during the film, because as you say, it's not an easy one to go through scene by scene. I believe we've got quite a sharp turn, even about face, for our next one, because I think it's Kagemusha we're looking at. So we're going back to samurai, I don't know if it's the Tokugawa period, probably not. Anyway, samurai 16th century. I'll have to check all my facts on this, but that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
And perhaps we'll try and do it this year.
Let's try,
Yeah. So thank you very much for listening to our 8th War Film podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.